Hello everyone, today we talk about a very serious topic that I think is a bit the whole purpose of why I'm here, and or at least what I do for a living, rather than Schwerpunkt per se, right? And it may seem narrower than the general scope, given that I mostly make general history videos, and yes, I do talk about medieval warfare, and I do talk about the art of war and battles and tactics, and more, as a matter of fact. But I hardly talk about, let's say, not just my field of expertise specifically, but what I actually do in it, right? And so showing you my actual work and what it means to be practically done. And today I had scheduled a video about high medieval Hungary, and I know there's someone here that would have liked to listen to it, but I promise, at least I hope that tomorrow I will do it, because I already scheduled it, was just reviewing it. Then I got via mail a book that I had ordered a couple of days ago that was written by a, let's say, it was the usual, at least in my country, is very common. There are no real monographies, but really a collection of articles about a given topic. And I was searching for it because I'm writing an article myself about, again, a very specific tactical topic, and I have to, by the way, the deadline is September the 30th, so I've already written it, but I need those last because I'm lazy. I don't, sometimes, especially when historiography is concerned, it takes a while to the last to gather the information. I'm a good point, but I got triggered in a sense by this because I live in this kind of attempt of remaining, apathetically undisturbed by anything and concentrating on my work routinely and doing etc. But every once in a while I have sparks, also adrenaline speaking, but for some reason I can't exercise, etc. Because I was waiting for this article, and the story is actually longer than it is, but to try to make it short, at the end of the day, this was an article that was written about a battle that I wrote in my doctoral thesis by this professor, who essentially published the book just, I don't even know whether exactly the month I finished my thesis. And he was the same guy who reviewed my same thesis in the commission in the end, and he's a nice guy. I have nothing specifically to say about his work, etc. I don't think he does a bad job. He's a much better medievalist than me, except I think, of course, that what I opened especially with my thesis that I haven't quite discussed, and everything remains rather mysterious, a giant Pandora box, at least in terms of what I could exploit because of that, because, I literally covered in my thesis the entirety of what's mostly in, not necessarily in my country, but given that it was my national history, in the thesis that I covered, what in fact, current historiography should have written about it in the next 30 years, I believe. Abroad, also, this stuff is not really studied much, but my same thesis, I think, I decided not to publish it, but it can easily cause an earthquake, even considering that I'm writing all these articles out of it now, and I'm publishing them. The medieval art of war, and the broader implications that this has, even if it's not so intuitive really in our world to this day. I could make an entire video just discussing why, I don't know, studying early 14th century Western European warfare is so significant even for today's politics and strategic culture and more, right, for our morality and our scientific production and so on. I could make an entire video and more infinitely, because I routinely make this content that ends up in the Easter Rain playlist that would highlight why this is such a desperate moment in history to write history profitably. I don't know. I think actually it's a moment of great opportunity as well. But at the same time, we lack the audience, and we lack the, let's say, in fact, the general awareness of why history is viscerally connected with our with our daily, like, practical daily politics, right? And not in a theoretical or abstract way, but in a very material, practical, concrete way, right? And so this is yet another issue. But more than else, my nuisance that I have highlighted in similar videos to this is that I don't think that those who are responsible for writing history are actually competent, and or the entire system that is being developed academically, at least in those cultures and in those countries where academy is a serious thing, not where it's been hijacked by leftism or Marxism. I must say that continental European academic culture is still not just a serious but a very serious thing, except it suffers of broader dynamics that fundamentally cannot be reversed. Like, they are, of course, the reflection of our politics and society of our times, and this revolves around the usual hyper-specialization, the lack of a comprehensive view, and, in fact, properly the realization of the usefulness of history. But more specifically, and this is something that in Europe we have as a problem since, say, after World War II, we have interrupted, in fact, that process of studying of properly military history to core in a good, substantial, systematic, traditional, and, in fact, consistent way. This is yet another topic that would deserve another video per se, because, we talk about different countries and different attitudes, different, say, parts of history that are covered in time and space, and so a lot of bias. And there is, what I see mostly as a continental European is the dichotomy with the Anglosphere, right? The idea that the Anglosphere has been dominating culturally, and that I personally very thankful to it, but also very critical of it, for the obvious reason that when we make history, we discuss, and that's the entire point of history, right? But at the same time, there's been a sort of crystallization that is both it's both our fault, right? From I will not digress even on the specific characteristics, but to make the long story short, the Anglosphere after World War II thought they could tell military history their own way, and continental Europe stopped writing military history, and this has absolutely nothing to do with the bullshit of history is written by the winners, and or the history of World War II is all wrong, this crap, which actually has developed, and often mostly even in the Anglosphere, as a concept that actually in continental Europe, but that's yet another reflection mostly of a abysmal popular culture that has lost any dignity of cultural worth, telling the truth. Because while it is true in that specific case that World War II is not nor studied nor understood, it has nothing to do with the average person paranoia and conspiratorial idea that gets down to a sort of self sort of narcissism, right? It's, you have no talent, no knowledge, no expertise, no competence, but you have to think better because you realize you can't do anything else in your life. But this is a serious mental problem that unfortunately I would say most people suffer of, and we all suffer by a certain degree too, because that's also the reality of the story, that you're not special, right? We all have our demons, and fighting these demons and taming them means to transfigure divinely, and this is completely lost as a universal traditional concept. But it's given what is occurring in the world, etc., I think that we're not heading towards kind of properly an improvement of our awareness and direction. And I got triggered today by that book because I realized that because I'm incidentally writing also about that battle for describing a very specific tactic of the early 14th century, and I was wondering, like, I hadn't read this book in over a year yet, because I knew also, frankly, that it would have not been written much. I'm telling you, 17 euros wasted for, and then also a lot of paper, like for some poor tree that did nothing wrong, but being chopped down and being written bullshit on it. Well, not really bullshit, come on. As I was saying before, it was just this is what we're going to discuss today. Like, what is the general trend, however, of even the best academic culture, and why it doesn't practically form, it doesn't have the premises, the foundations of the creation of an art of war expert in the first place. So if you visit my Historian playlist, that has become pretty active because every once in a while, again, I need to vent with these videos about a bit more the general picture rather than strictly, spatially and timely themed historical content, looking at properly at history and science as a method. I have explained countless times. For example, last year, for example, that video, did we get medieval warfare right? More or less I was talking about the same things, and except it was talking about something very specific that still has to do with the work that I'm talking about today, about early 14th century war. Okay, that's my thing. I'm sorry if it sounds boring, but just making the historically practical example of saying, okay, those armies here and there did this and that, and why didn't we get it right, and why this is important, etc., in the broader sphere. Sometimes I made even videos like, how do you study medieval history to become competent on it? I've made that entire von Clausewitz playlist about the von Kriege that I have partially interrupted for reasons that are nothing but, sentimental from my side, in a way. But I would have to resume that as well, exactly to expose, right, the further, as I was doing in every single one of those videos. There are hundreds, right, that nobody watches because, again, people don't care, and this is exactly the problem. They don't understand that that's just me reading through them on the basis of YouTube stats, realizing and having confirmed day after day after day after day what we will exemplify today, unfortunately. That is the complete historical ignorance. And this is, I don't pretend it to be like, yes, a bit of an asshole, and I like to provoke, I like to be arrogant, to be haughty, and to be pushy and insistent and breaking balls and all these things. But the point being, actually, that without that, you can't quite pretend to be. Like, this is what I criticize mostly liberals and conservatives alike today, that none of them is actually doing practical things at all, nor intelligent ones for that matter, but how the entire point is about essentially rejecting any form of personal responsibility, and pretending that just, being ideally from one side means that you are anything meaningful from a human point of view, and that this should be what we should be content with before you are, stuck in a coffin and, forgotten by the world. This is not exactly my take on life and how it should be lived. And I think that military history, and I may make yet another video about why military history is the best in this case, and why it's probably the single most important thing that people should learn. I made a video that is titled, "Why is history the most important thing why is war the most important thing to learn by humanity?" Because it's useless to flatter ourselves. I put even myself into it, right? And I do it, again, as the guy who just works on that type of source and that does that kind of job. And I perfectly say, there is an immense amount of things that just by the fact that we don't know, we can't even claim to be experts, right? But there is a method that is the only one that can make you rise in that by some degree, right? So as I often say, this is not just to put myself or whoever does this on a pedestal or, patting shoulders and all these things. This is simply providing with a method that eventually people will have to simply go by and maybe improve, surely, but at the same time getting right in the first place. Because great part of our civilizational problem today is that we have Western civilization has provided with literally every single thing. Like, for instance, look at even some figures like von Clausewitz. Between the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, there have been, certain works and ideas and, in fact, methods have been properly laid out that were it. Right, they could again be improved in theory, but all what has happened is that culture has collapsed, right? Because we have let in the fourth estate, and the entire moral and scientific dimension of our civilization has literally shrunk to the level of insignificance of the average person that objectively has never done anything in history. And the question here. Anything that I mean really was meaningful or relevant for us today, even to come to grips with it, because again, history is about generally everyone, but it's also and especially about certain specific ones and certain specific things and certain specific forces that, even if fueled by lots of people, were at the end of the day led by someone else and achieved through the vision of someone else, right? Maybe even somebody who wasn't, even this dramatic figure, because this is the actual point of history. It's often disappointing. It's not really a history of heroes most of the time. There is a general mediocrity, even in those who do things that is really disconcerting. We need to find patterns and narratives. But at the end of the day, what really matters is the transcendental, is the sacred, is what you can, appreciate through this, in fact, cultivation that you must accomplish if you want to improve yourself as a human being in the first place. And this can happen through many ways, but it doesn't seem to be particularly appreciated because it's too much of an effort, right? The worst thing is finding those people that, for example, work and think that, just work per se is it's just the path to heaven. You worked, so what does it mean? Everybody has ever worked. Like, does this qualify a person to be intelligent, capable, practical, successful, beautiful? And I really mean it, because it's all interconnected. Or, to have, again, left a trace in this world that we can say, well, it was really meaningful. It was something that you really, the rest of the world capitalized upon in a consistent way, and it improved our understanding, and it really saved us from the magnitudinal collapse that, in fact, the mass has caused on purpose. By the way, even maybe. Unconsciously, largely unconsciously by a certain degree, but still because of the fact that it was not fundamentally capable of doing anything else. And this could take different, examples, but the point of becoming an expert in the art of war is, I think, very important, especially for males, and so for the archetypal model of leadership and what this would even supposed to mean, right, in terms of competence and control and reliability and authority and discipline and so on, that is continuously missed, right? A prerogative. Like, I always laugh when people say, neo-fascists or neo-Nazis are, they just will bring Nazi fascism to power again. Nazi fascists, in their cultural and their development, were at least people who understood things like the value of discipline, who would actually get themselves killed, which doesn't actually take anything, as courage is actually one of, if not the cheapest, moral quality that you can find in humans, right? No doubt about its nobility per se, but it also, military history shows us consistently that it's virtually useless, because even if it is, it makes the thing, everybody makes it, right? There is no army in history that is not courageous, where people don't get themselves killed or etc. In order to win, it takes way more than that. Well, today we don't even have people who actually care about discipline. It's the same thing that I was saying before. People don't want to take any form of responsibility. So this kind of emotionalistic rejection of, conspiratorial obsession, running the world and who rules it and all these things, just reveals the complete weakness of this individual. So the interesting thing about this too is also a safeguard against, let's say, in part at least against the rise of totalitarianism, is that never in history, like at the time of totalitarianism, people really starved, right? So they were weak and stupid and irresponsible and uncivilized and culturally underdeveloped. The more totalitarian the regime, the most underdeveloped the country. I don't know if you noticed, and you wonder why communism spread mostly just in some areas, or national socialism within certain disaster realities and so on. It's always the same story, right? The point is that today, people are disgustingly rich, right? Even those who complain, gas prices, all these things, and poverty, it's bullshit. Their grandparents lived with like 1/50 of what they have, and they still whine like bitches because they think that they're special and the heroes and the victims and the martyrs of the situation. So, first of all, military history is not for this kind of people. So it's not for, like, say, 99% of the population. And I'm just being generous there. And the main problem is also that, again, history should be understood before being addressed, right? History is not like, again, a bitch that you can twist to your own excuse. It's, if anything, history that treats you as her own bitch and twists as you. Especially when you don't want to understand it in the first place. And it requires a massive cultural background. Like, you cannot invent history. Like, I've been, before Schwerpunkt, I had this kind of useless dream of, or, it was not even a dream, a plan. And it was partly connected to my same weakness, to my same need to, to rise and all this kind of, and shine, this kind of things. Of kind of spreading culture or making kind of disclosure, and I wasn't particularly good at that. But when I realized that I topped the average, and basically what I was saying was so already, and it doesn't take anything, I can assure you. Like, it doesn't take any special intelligence, competence, capacity, whatever, right? At least of what I would consider like to be just an average person come out of high school. So that nobody would even understand what I was talking about. Then I said, that's it, I will do something else. I tried to start a Facebook page, then I passed to YouTube. And I wasn't talking specifically about warfare, but mostly like right around there. And I was cultivating myself further in the process. And then also I began lots of other things to the point that I in fact projected myself further, especially in the last, which are the same years of Schwerpunkt, by the way, because it's when I started the doctorate, and then I began to get kind of like fully insulated in this history thing, right? To the point that I went so far that I realized with today's book here that I also put myself in a dangerous situation. Why? Well, it's not much of a problem, actually. The point is that I wrote a 700 pages thesis that can be easily used by any other person, including the professor that examined me, who told me, well, we will be using your thesis because it's very useful. Well, of course, I did the entire freaking work, and surely somebody will be exploiting that. I haven't checked whether this year, at least I haven't found whether other stuff about my topic has been written. Of course, I had to learn a lot of things from other professors, this one included too, but I realized that systematically that diachronic comparative capacity that I also been taught actually by a very specific person that died last year, by the way, and that I was left with this, important legacy, with also morally, I presume, because I was one of the few people that was just listening, taking notes, studying, and making the freaking work, kind of made me realize that this first of all was not worth it. I could have made something much smaller as a thesis, and I could have even published it more easily. Instead, I decided not to publish it because, first of all, there are mistakes in it that are not so big. I could easily correct them, but in order to correct something like 700 pages, like I'm taking months just to write a 30 pages article, you understand that it's beyond kind of even comprehensively my reach. Of course, there are entire parts of the thesis that are completely fine, and that's why I prefer to just start writing articles and articles and articles, and even not giving a damn about the same academic hierarchy or career, because I said, you know what, it's about what I write. It's not how much I write or how many articles numerically I make, so that some university will have to give a shit about that. I'm making my videos on Schwerpunkt, and hopefully this thing is growing. I am writing this stuff in parallel, and hell, I realize that I'm light years ahead. Again, what this guy was supposed to be, again, it doesn't take anything to be light years ahead. Just making the whole freaking job. That is, in theory, the greatest expert on the topic. So I'm just waiting now to send my articles out there in the world. I already, it already happened with one. I'm working actually with 3 at a time now, and so my plan is to write at least 4 every year from now on. At least I don't plan to write books. At least I don't think it's particularly useful from a strategic point of view right now, at least. But the point is, how do I do that, right? What is that triggered me, for example, in today's book? Like, I wrote, I can tell you here, well, I don't know, maybe the equivalent of 30 pages of an entire article about the tactics of that specific damn battle that this guy in the book that are just both treats like in, I think, 10 pages, right, and small ones, and in the ones in which that would be like, I wrote 60 pages and this guy 10, and they're unresearched. There is this also, methodologically speaking, this kind of attitude of, for example, this battle has I don't know, 40 sources talking about that, and they tell very specific things that are quite big altogether. So that it took me 30 pages, by the way, just to analyze the whole freaking thing from a tactical point of view, to reconstruct the battle. That is, step by step, understanding what did really happen, right? Reconstructing the battlefield, the armies, the battle lines, how cavalry and infantry interacted within them, how they fought, and every source naturally also says slightly different things. You have to interpret that. They are not particularly easy sources. There are some very long, in kind of classical sounding, kind of pre-humanistic Latin from one side. There's vernacular. There are also contradicting information. You have to make sense of all of that. This guy writes his own tactical analysis of the battle, and what does it say? Basically nothing. It just makes a hypothesis by picking one source or the other and saying, well, maybe this means this and this means that, and also makes a hypothesis that, frankly, if he had carried out the actual tactical analysis correctly, like, would have avoided, right? And that are based on some kind of prejudices and on some kind of ideas that, by the way, are not even source evidence. Like, every time I make a statement or an hypothesis or whatever, I have the good custom, methodologically speaking, to look at all the freaking bibliography, and not just quoting the sources accurately, but quoting and reading the entire thing that has been written by every human on Earth that is publicly available, to say, look, maybe this guy had already said this thing, or had maybe given more credit to this kind of hypothesis or the other for this and that reason. You have nothing but to learn in the process, right? I realized that, you see, this is the exact problem, that this article in that book is being written because every once in a while there is some guy, like the one that, for example, decided to make this book that is not the professor, and he's another professor, but that I never heard, and that frankly I don't think I will ever hear again, decided once in a while, say, let's talk in general about this thing. Like, it's not even, let's try to find out, let's understand that history in itself has a specific value. It's just like a gold mine. You can market this in a way that nobody has ever seen, because it's an infinite work. It never ends. And there are whole branches that have been unexplored, unexploited, etc. Now, let's, generally speaking, have a sort of meeting. Let's make a conference. Let's, again, cut another bit of trees and spend another bit of energy for making people coming from everywhere to pretend that they're doing something intellectually developed. And let's just make people speak at these conferences that nobody will ever even understand what they're writing, because the concept is, a 30 pages long article should be a much more complicated thing that cannot even be exposed in 20 minutes of a conference relation. And let's pretend, that eventually let's publish all these interventions that are not even actually, the same thing that people said there, but, what eventually they wrote about it later with all due time, and let's give these people the presence in this conference as a curriculum bonus, let's say, point, and let's pretend that these are actually the great scholars and minds that exist at that point. Again, this depends. For example, again, the aforementioned professor really wrote a shitload of stuff, and he's a great expert. He's one of those people that really go to archives. I'm a lazy ass, don't do that, but also because I found out that, again, if you actually dig seriously into certain other types of sources, unfortunately my own topics are not answered by archives most of the times, and there is still somebody else studying the archives, and still, you can use their work absolutely in a fair way. And say, I can write and going far beyond what even the great expert has done. And I taught all this myself. Like, I was taught a method, it is true. And I was taught outside of university, outside of school, just, again, by someone that I also honestly don't know how he made it in his life to achieve the levels he did. But that, I began to do all by myself. Like, I started my actual polynological education exclusively by myself, because there was no way to find any of this at university. And it turns out that by, essentially obsessing myself exclusively with this, again, I reached as far as I wouldn't even imagine, because the point was not reaching somebody else's level. It was just understanding the freaking damn thing, right? And that is the best thing you can do for yourself, right? To the point, of course, you have to scrape the bottom of the barrel, which means you have, again, as we will see now, to pick all the freaking damn sources and studies about a God-given topic, and you have to study them all until you sort everything out, which sounds, plausible at least, because it's backed with evidence and it makes sense, right? And it's not just wishful thinking, right? How to do that? Well, hell, it's a real mess, I can tell you that. You have to start early, right? Everybody can do it. If you're 90 years old and you want to start this, good luck, you can't. The point is that it should be driven by some broader, mental stability, right? Morally and scientifically should be habituated to the idea that you have to work, right? And you have to be doing this. And by a certain degree, I think the best is also conceiving that you should be doing it in spite of everything else. Right, there are people who say, but how do I work? Right, in conservatism now, there's this disgusting idea that if it's something that doesn't make you make money, and the concept is very relative, by the way, because it's mostly set on that kind of cheap market, quick cashing idea that actually is how poor people reason, and not actually successful people do. So if you're privileged, especially, which is a perfectly good thing, you should be proud of, and spit in the face of those who speak against you because you're privileged, because they're just a bunch of communists that will never have anything surely from me in that sense. but just contempt and actually, happiness for their misery and disadvantage. At that point, because they called it themselves, right? I don't despise poor people. Hell, I also come from part of my family was poor, but they always worked and they never complained about the fact they were exploited and all this crap, right? And in fact, they're not poor anymore. Surprise, surprise. But aside from that, the other aspect of the story, because I've seen from the other side of my family also that there are rich, privileged people that also kind of don't give a fuck about being so, and so they take everything like a bit of a joke and a vacation. I realized that if you don't combine the two things, and if you don't have this broader ethics, and you don't actually work hard because you have a point and you see beyond your nose in the broader scale of universal values and something that is even more important than your own life, which is, I guess, what nobody understands really anymore, because it's all become kind of this radical emotional subjectivism, and it's just, the world is what you think it is, and not what it actually is, which is a very different thing. And you should at least learn how to think in order to approach the world with your very poor zoological means that we are confronted with every time, but at least realizing that you have to make a freaking effort to understand it, because there is a truth and it's out there, and if you don't want to realize that, you will crash your face into it. Working hard, right? And again, deciding that you will, write this article, this work, no matter what, and that this will cost you a lot, will cost you, I will not even list what cost it to me, but, lots of personal things as well. People wouldn't like to give up, or would think that, for what I'm doing, I'm crazy, and they wouldn't understand what I'm doing that well. If you don't see that, right, you can't get there, right? This has always been, in the entire traditional ethics, the entire point of the story: self-sacrifice. No surprise that people don't understand religion today anymore, because they don't get the point of it. They're just searching for some kind of, facts that are allegedly more important than thoughts or actions. This is a passive attitude, right? This means essentially accepting that you are living within, under a superstition, right? Which is unironically what instead religion is associated by liberal secular talk, at least, and that is instead the other way, exactly the other way around. Or many religious people, that of course just believe in a superstition. Actually, most religious people actually believe in a superstition, which is essentially they're worshipping Satan in its most concrete form, even though they are Christian, right? Because they don't understand it. It's their problem. Like, they don't understand it. Nobody has ever taught them religion, their family, their church, the world, right? They have stopped learning, right? And people are not magic special. They work without knowledge, right? They don't, right? There is no inner good that is not cultivated, that is not the fruit of blood and tears and sweat, right? There is no way out of that. So if you're not willing to accept that you have to suffer psychophysically in order to achieve anything positive, abandon entirely even the idea of living, because it's useless, right? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And weakness takes over always, right? That's the second principle of thermodynamics, right? You will melt down if you just stick to the material side of the story. There's no way you're gonna make it, and that's why you have to go for the beyond. And this has a transfiguring potential, and history really does this, because it shows you how, by far, right, how superficial and irresponsible and ignorant and unaware and careless and immoral and unscientific also most of the elite work really is, right? And again, not that there is a problem with elite. Let's erase this collectivistic, statalistic delusion that the elites are bad. If the elites are bad, the rest of the people are by far worse in a demonic sense, right? And this has always happened. There is not a period in which this is not true historically, right? So stop pretending that if the elite screws up, you are better than that, because you are always worse than that until you're not elite yourself, right? And this is the difference in conservatism between ethno-nationalism and imperial elitism, right? Because the latter is the only universal tradition. The rest is, again, statalistic, collectivistic delusion. It's anti-tradition at the core of the concept, right? And that's why there are so many National Socialists. They are just alt-righters, that is, leftists, because that's what alt-right literally means, even in the name. And the actual point here is that we are not really looking for what you also have to get written on a page, right? History, as I was saying before, that's why I make this kind of videos, that I can't tell you about the kingdom of this, the Dutch of that, or this battle, or this knight, equipment, all these things. But, and that's why the whole thing is misunderstood, because it's as if you had a screen in front of you. You just see the screen, and you don't understand that the screen is part of a reality that has a depth that is more real, that is not just a projection, right? So, becoming an expert in a field like the art of war, as always, by manual, would be studying the Von Kriege. That's the first thing you could say. Like, if you have to go buy the book, and there is only one book here, the Von Kriege is the Bible. It comes before the Bible. Not Sun-Tzu, not the Chinese colonels, not the bullshit of military bloggers, whatever. We're talking about the Von Kriege, right? Not even my own videos, because my own videos are historical, but they're not talking about the theory of the art of war, even remotely close as von Clausewitz does, except when we comment on the Von Kriege, but that's the actual point, and just know that at least all my content is essentially a Clausewitzian declination, right, of history, that is to say, the correct interpretation of it, which escapes minds and realizations and awareness exactly in this way. Now, studying the Von Kriege, I said it countless times, doesn't mean that you have to read it, right? Once I found a moron on a YouTube video that was like a Von Kriege audiobook, like, and this guy said, okay, well, I finished listening to it in 4 hours. Like, and he said, in fact, something atrocious. He hadn't understood anything. Like in 2 or 3 lines, he said there are these people around the internet that they think they can, listen to things, even if they state they're actually listening, not doing something else, but actually pretending that means learning, right? And that percent style. You also know these people have never learned anything. They've never been in a university, never been in a place that would require at least that kind of higher level application, which I can assure you does exist, because again, universities are not, and this is, you can hate the official but not the institution, right? This again, conservative paranoia that has taken place is that we should bail out from public education because public education is bad. When did you give up on public education? When you did give up to the idea that there are some moral and scientific standards, just like in law, that have to be taught, right? For you to say, no, just go to private schools because everything will be better there. Yeah, you can surely see how well it goes. But they're basically becoming all alike, right? Public and private at the same time. But the reason is because conservatives are giving up public university. I can tell you, coming from the top humanistic one in Europe, that yeah, there are kind of lots of leftists, but I've rarely been taught leftist stuff, and just in very fringe courses that were pretty random and kind of not in, let's say, the core of the matter. But that actually the 1968 wave of fanatical and just cultural Marxists, because of course these are people who have never studied Lenin in Russian or Marx and Engels in German, but that pretend to be are dying out, right? That actually in history, in this kind of public universe, in the largest one, in the top, you see that most people are actually not leftists. They're actually all conservatives, right? So the bullshit that you say, give up on education entirely, just wake up. There's not, first of all, there's not just the United States, but also within the United States, there are lots of exceptions, and you are kind of letting them die because of this bullshit ideology that, studying humanistic also subjects is useless, right? And the primary reason why you have a radical political issue in the United States, among the other things, is that you decided to just look at a materialistic functionality, right? That although it was not bent to Marxistic ideology, in some cases eliminated still the concept of moral forces, which is the same reason why eventually Marxism too has taken over in your country. So if you don't realize that, you will fail anyway, and that's why modern conservatism at large is just a load of garbage, and people who are part of it should feel just ashamed of themselves and whatever cultural background they come from, because that has nothing to do with human dignity, and we have to face it at this point, that you cannot be an intelligent person if you're not educated. There is no way around that, right? People are not born intelligent or stupid. They have to be cultivated to be responsible, competent people. It's the same concept that goes around, discipline in military academies, all these things. If you don't beat people to blood, like how can you give them a discipline to withstand, killing human beings in actual warfare, right? You cannot have one without the other. It's nonsensical, and this is not just I say it as a military historian. This is I say because, of course, there are ways and ways of doing that, and only certain specific ones are the right ones, and the discretional capacity to understand that is lost at large, right? So studying the Von Kriege means that you have literally, like more or less something. First of all, you should learn German, right? This is not. It should be mandatory with everything. Like, for example, if you want to study medieval warfare, you cannot afford to do it if you don't know Latin, as you cannot study ancient history if you do not know Greek, right? It doesn't make any sense. You cannot say, well, but I'm studying, I don't know, a Norse saga, so I don't need Latin. Bullshit, because the entire background that you're provided with that is also founded on Latin sources anyway, and by magnitudinal scale. So if you lack that specific awareness, culturally, linguistically, literally, and more, philologically, you cannot understand anything, right? History doesn't mean reading stuff. History doesn't even mean learning stuff. It doesn't even mean studying stuff. It means understanding that, right? And you have to pass throughout this whole steps to do it. Right, so studying the Von Kriege means that you have to be able to freaking understand every single damned word that von Clausewitz is writing. You have to study it as if you were to prepare to an actual exam. You have to comment it, you have to explain it, you have to write it, you have to dig into that. You should wrap your mind around it, you have to come to grip with it, right? And you have to do it for years of your life, right? If you don't do this, don't study. I wouldn't say don't study history, because really without, and I explained it in that video, it's useless to approach it. It's like, I don't know, I can't find an adequate comparison, but it's just imagine thinking how to swim or to drive a car or a motorcycle without even having seen one, or maybe just having seen one, but absolutely not having an idea of any context of that, not even just how it works, etc., but what it means even to drive it or to swim for, and how your body reacts. It doesn't make any freaking sense. It's perfectly useless until you do it, and that's the point, right? You can't look at that and see it and like it, but until you don't start it, you will not understand that, right? That is the Bible. Like, that comes before anything else if you want to be a military historian. Then, and only then, what you have to do, and you have to do in parallel with it, of course I give you, because somewhere you have to start, but still with the quick, fast-paced say, with a legitimately paced goal finishing the Von Kriege more or less in an early time, right? Also studying it all in a row maybe it takes years, maybe, but still doing it continuously, not just every once in a while. You have to start reconstructing campaigns and battles. I said it ad nauseum, right? You cannot read books just in saying, oh, well, I know what's medieval warfare. I don't know, the army, the English army of the 100 Years' War because I read an Osprey about that. Or 10 Ospreys, or whatever. It doesn't make any sense, right? Until you don't actually go pick all the freaking sources about a single damn battle. And we're talking about, again, as I was saying before, tens of them. And you can't translate all the various languages, Latin, medieval vernacular, of different languages and so on. You cannot understand anything of that battle, let alone any other in the same campaign, for example, that you should also be able to reconstruct for that matter if you want to have a better insight of the same battle. And the whole point of this is that you should do it forever, right? It doesn't stop to one battle. And this doesn't take 1 day or 3 days. This normally takes months, right? Because first of all, you have to gather the sources. You have to be sure that they exist. And in the process, and that's why a formal education is needed, and not just whatever you feel like. They tell you, you can survive. Even Joe Rogan, these people like that you can even agree with in many other contexts. The same conservatives, the Daily Wire, Jordan Peterson say they will say the right things, but they will not show you the amount of exhausting work that it actually takes, right? Because aside from their ideas, still statalism, collectivism has left this kind of absolutely worthless exaltation of the individual. That is to say, if you play by these simple rules, everything will go fine. No, it will not go fine. It will go very bad most of the times. And also, if it goes well, it's because you have augmented dramatically your individual responsibilities. So you will have to bear an ever greater burden. And that, yes, will make you more powerful and more capable. But if you escape that because you think that by playing by those rules you can escape fatigue, well, or work effort on any kind, and that's what most of that message, which is marketed, of course, is sold for. Just know that you will not make it, and because you're not supposed to, and then you cannot complain about the fact that you're a failure in life, right? Even if you follow, the 12 rules for life and other kind of amenities, right? Only history teaches you how to be a better human being. And this is where we should get down to in practice, because history is really the history of everything. At the end of the day, it's the act of researching, it's the method that you use that makes you grow. And again, until you do it, there's no magic card. You see, you can see it anywhere. Also from YouTube, all these ads of people that promise you, look, just like get into trading, or look at the simple method to achieve this, or make this amount of money. Yes, in a moment of total global crisis where everything is gonna recess and where there will be major political, social, yeah, sure, you're going to be the smart ass that without any competence will start making pile of money without any effort. Again, you have a problem with physics if you think like that, by a certain degree. That is to say, it's not that it's impossible, but even if it were just a statistical matter, it still doesn't speak of you, because stats are something, and are based on real people, and real people are different, and some are qualified and some are not. So you will not be the lucky one extracted by the lottery if you don't move your ass, right? And that's the entire point of the story. That's why the self-sacrifice is everything, because if you're not willing to make the extreme sacrifice, you could not also achieve the absolute. And that's up to you, simply, right? And it's much more difficult than it seems, because we are a fallen kind, right? It's not because there is bad luck, because there are superstitions, because again, there are evil people that are plotting kind of world domination, out of some, terribly, whatever you think your favorite conspiracy theory is at the end of the day delusion, but because you are faulty, you are imperfect, right? And you basically deserve everything that happens to you, for better or for worse, and it's mostly, overwhelmingly, in everybody's life, for worse, right? So entering that kind of mindset before studying history, because it's also what history continuistically actually shows you constantly, unless it's not dramatically rigged by ideology. But again, that's why we're talking about a method and an activity, not about the contents, right? Most people, of course, don't even understand what history means. It's just like science, right? Most people think that science is a bunch of, pre-packed candies that you can't find in a bucket and, treating yourself, spoiling yourself with. Science is the actual work. It's the actual method. The same goes with history. History is not something that you can't be passively given by me, by whoever you follow, by reading a book or whatever. It's something that you have to do by yourself. So the entire point of history is motivating yourself to do it, right? And we all have our reasons, but in a way, we also have the same reasons, right? And we that's the reason why I don't need to tell them to you, or at least, we all know them. And we could even discuss them at some point, not today, right? So this is literally it. You would say, but Schwerpunkt, you say that this is, that is, everything is simple. The point is, it must be hard, right? Difficult. It's not, nothing, not even war is actually complicated. War, if you look at it, it's actually very simple, right? There isn't much to say from the, in nosological terms, aside from, of course, the historical reconstruction of it that, is particularly difficult. The problem is that it's pretty damn hard. And I'm talking in waging it, and waging it successfully. And this is true for any war, right? Even though the degrees of difficulty are different, also because they are different politically, for that matter. In any case, let's not descend also in this specific aspect. The point, though, that the step that book, triggered to me, that all this kind of flow of thoughts, is how do I realize when do I become an actual expert, right? I already made videos regarding how to do what I just told you to do, how to reconstruct a medieval battle. I made a video about that. How to gather the sources, not yet, because I see that you don't follow my PhD series, because you say, this guy bragging about, well, I'm actually telling you how to write a doctoral thesis. If you could actually, and not just how to write it, again, how the people say on the internet, you have to start by doing this and all this stuff. No, I'm telling you how to spit blood in order to achieve it. And what are the terrible things that will happen to you personally, mentally and physically while you try to do it, right? And why you could always fail from a moment to another, right? Because that's, again, what the entire history and war also teaches you, and that's why military history is so damn important. In the meanwhile, also just by reconstructing it, right? What I mean here is something else. What I mean is, how do I know that I am an expert? Like, what are the indicators that make you realize you have enough? Well, first of all, when you get there, you know it. Because the same steps that you have taken are the ones that you know how much they costed, where they brought you, right? So initially, it will be, of course, there is all a step. You probably won't go just by the normal ways. I told you before, the internet is, the confrontation is often the first problem, right? Having quarrels with people, debates, arguments. You will probably lose some years of your life in the process. I'm talking biologically speaking, but it will have been worth it to give quality to it, right? Because until, again, you don't crush your head against something, you cannot properly understand what certain things mean. Then you will know how to navigate yourself in that kind of environment. You will start realizing that historiography, especially, has limits, right? When you start reconstructing a battle, for example, and you really want to know what the hell happened, and just like today, you open a book about, and you do the work, right? First of all, then you read this other works that other people wrote from some kind of qualitative standpoint. You realize they didn't even pose themselves the same problems that you pose yourself, and this is not an horizontal difference. This is a vertical one, right? If you want to reconstruct a battle, there's no way around it. Like, you have to tell what the hell happened, right? I was just reading yet another article about a similar battle yesterday, and I realized that there's this guy who has written like 30 pages about this battle that is also documented in its combat and what actually happened. Presumably, if you want to reconstruct a battle, you want to know what, at least happened, these two armies fighting against one another, and that skipped entirely that, right? There is all the background, politically and socially, all the kind of scholarly thing that shows you that he knows the political and social context, like the socio-economical issues, and then you tell, there are these armies, more or less. It's always like on 30 pages, like one page only that talks supposedly about the battle, and it doesn't even reconstruct the tactics, of which the sources on the battle that are the ones of the 14th century and the 13th century actually just tell from an actually military point of view. They don't tell you the background. The background is for before and after, because they tell about other political and social stuff. When you talk about the battle, they talk about the freaking military stuff. And if you skip that, you're just an idiot, right? Especially when you're writing a title that, an article title that people are going to read, because it's called The Battle of, and considering also how few there are of this kind, and people want to know what happened, and you don't write that. So and it was full of mistakes, by the way, as well. When you start spotting mistakes, when people say, only the source talks about that, at least 5 sources that talk about that. But it's very common, right? That's the point when you start realizing that you have gone. It's a relative awareness. Of course, we don't have an absolute awareness, but still the improvement will have been absolute in terms of what you know about that specific thing, right? So there is properly a background that you acquire by making this exercise. And the most interesting thing, when I say diachronic and comparative, that is crucial, right? Diachronic means that you have to study things throughout time, fundamentally. So this is very true for military history. You cannot understand it if you just focus on a specific part of it. That's why the Von Kriege, for example, is crucial, and most people don't understand it because they don't have themselves a diachronic understanding of military history, because they think that von Clausewitz is writing about essentially Napoleonic warfare, and he's actually not, right? Napoleonic warfare is just the most important thing that had happened military-wise at the time, and he is just reconstructing through that practical example of history, but also with examples from modern warfare, medieval warfare, from ancient warfare, the actual universals of war, right? So that is the entire point of the Von Kriege. It, in fact, is aimed at providing with a positive theory for actual command, right? That the same von Clausewitz quite, openly expresses, says, practice first, right? If you are a military man, just will learn more from war than from my book. But if you want to, say, think that there is a theory that can help you, can perfect, like your actual military skill, you have necessarily, right? Not if you want, there is, right, a theory that you can draw from history, military history, which is the actual war that happened, by the way, for the way we can reconstruct it, which is also with a certain degree of accuracy, and that in fact matches. And when you look at that universals, and you realize that they repeat themselves, and they all highlighted that pattern, you also know much better what reality in that sense is, because you have learned why that thing happens, right? It's just the same reason why most of the times people don't get war in the first place. First of all, it's very difficult to make them understand that everything military is actually political and social, but that the military here represents yet one element of the triad, and so they can't go without one another, right? Because that punching possibility is always present in any community, right? And culturalism is nonsense. Also, we spoke already quite openly against culturalism and its satanic nature. But aside from that, the concept being that you cannot invent what will happen. Like those people who said, I don't know. We have seen it a lot with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? People claiming the most strange things, completely random fantasy, abstraction, right? People quoting Sun-Tzu saying, the initial Russian attack and retreat was all a scam because they needed to show, the Ukrainian army in the southeast that, they were involved elsewhere. Instead, they were pinning them down and enveloping. But, at this point, we can't even quote Sun Tzu. Yes, the same Sun Tzu that says that no general should ever besiege a city. That is exactly what the Russians were hopelessly and still trying, at least with Kharkiv, to do. But because, of course, they can't at this point, by the way, as they lack manpower and they're starting to regress in the first place. But in the first place, in fact, the complete nonsense, the complete and utter incompetence, no form of, not even formal, informal, strategic culture of any kind, right? That sense of just wishing that reality bends to your bullshit just because you're too stupid to behave otherwise. This is the point, the deadline where we have arrived, right? This is you can always get worse. You can become more of an animal and less of a human being. Yes, you can always do that. But the point is that other people's humanity are not really allowing you to. Like, you will destroy yourself in the process. But aside from this, just for the record, again, warfare is not a matter of personal opinion, right? And it is mostly so because, first of all, there's no absolutistic concept within it, right? You study things as they happen, and you can't predict part of them by a certain degree, and they should always be connected with, again, the political and social background and what the goals are and what the moral forces, first of all, are about in the situation. So if you don't even frame reality within those boundaries, you can't quite, even dialectically, try to make sense of a thing, right? This is one of the most important legacies also of the Clausewitzian theory. Things have to be laid out. They have to make sense. They have to be researched. They must be evidenced, because otherwise they are worthless. They don't have any value. We should stop it. One of the single most important thing we should do in our civilization is stopping to pretend that people's opinions have any value or worth or dignity if they don't. And most of them don't, right? And that's the actual problem that we have. That we grow dependent on other people's bullshit that does not match even with reality. And the only reason it's our fault because we're too ignorant and too stupid to understand that, because nobody taught us, first of all, but we also never made the effort. And of course, as I was exemplifying, and as also with education, and as also von Clausewitz does with the theories, that you can always learn things from reality, but there is all a theory, a method, and a large amount of knowledge that is already there, right? Our civilization has already skyrocketed dramatically centuries ago, to the point that if people today knew just, 1/10 of what was achieved by the greatest minds of those times, just in their works, by studying and learning them, we would essentially have a 10 per GDP growth overnight. And I'm not kidding. Right? This is the greatest problem of mankind. And all the paranoia about antinatalist. You see, we are living in a moment of demographic recession, and people are antinatalist because in their delusional mindset, somebody has told them for some reason, the planet cannot sustain this. that it's a crime. And it doesn't actually mean, of course, that people don't want to take any responsibility as parents, because that requires to be actually dignified human beings, except, of course, not every parent is, because, of course, these are the kind of people that eventually also make children sometimes. But the actual problem here stands from the fact that there is no... Well, it's like those people who say, I don't know, I'm a minimalist. Means, okay, you're poor, so you just want to pretend that you don't think shit and that, you don't have anything to manage so that you can feel better about yourself, so even intentionally. This is what we're creating the world like. And the unfortunate aspect of this story is that outside of Western civilization, most people are completely empty in this way, right? So it's extremely easy for Western civilization in its cultural hegemony to, let's say, make these people, sticking to the worst of it, like in terms of leftism and all this bullshit, antinatalism, critical race theory, gender theory, all this crap, and pretending that that's okay. That's also what lots of these people do, because they're paranoid, because they don't feel integrated, and so instead of trying to improve themselves, they just buy the worst shit and they feel victimized. We're talking also about Europeans. I'm talking also about, I don't know, the divide existing between... if you live under 70 years of communism, what do you think your entire culture can be reduced to? If not nothingness, right? That's a serious problem. It's not a problem that is resolved overnight. 30 years later, you can say, well, now I live in a normal country. You're not. You have major psychological, cultural, personal, civilizational problems, educational problems. It's a tragedy. And if you don't even picture that because you don't want to suffer, even though deep inside you perfectly know what happened in those 70 years, you cannot go anywhere in the world. Unplug, right? Disappear, because you cannot cope with reality, and that's not normal for a healthy human being. So either you get cured, but no, of course, the illness will spread again. So we'll buy nationalism, socialism, all the worst collectivism, statalism that you can imagine. And worse than that, everything that is actually dignified humanly will be abhorred, will be kept away, will be demonized, will be treated as evil. And the reason is that people are scared of that, right? I'm just annoyed by this, because I know that requires such a moral weakness and inconsistency that it's not even really a problem in what you can do personally, but it's the lack of your human potential fulfilled that will cause problems for people who actually work and do things to maintain you, which frankly I don't want to do and I don't give a shit about, right? Because you should think about yourself and not about and realizing the things that happen because of you, right? If you remain without gas, there is a wicked, delusional, culturally underdeveloped situation that brought to cause this problem actively, but the problem of you being dependent on such civilizationally underdeveloped reality is your problem. You decided to depend on their gas and on their oil. So you are stupid and you should pay for it, and you should not ask me to pay for you, or at least I can't help you and I will help you, because if I don't, of course, the whole thing will be much worse. But that's exactly what it means to have a constructive mentality. The other, the effects of that, right? Stability, unity, cohesion is you can win everything, political and military, through that, right? And sometimes, of course, it's just sheer power for the way you already have acquired civilizationally and all the moral and material resources, and that's exactly the ones that you should use. So I'm not particularly worried even. I think that there is too much hysteria about this whole situation. What I'm very concerned of, again, is that there is a civilizational background that you can simply fall back to, and that you don't even know that it ever existed. Right? I don't know if you realize this, but having grown in Europe, I witnessed this, that, sometimes I make these digressions because I'm convinced to speak as I do, mostly to a kind of Northern American audience, but also still a British. This is slightly different for certain other realities in Europe, or other, say, Commonwealth members, club members, let's say, former ones at least, that Europe is not, and this happens, and I speak from a conservative point of view when I see, say, American conservatism, etc. I think sometimes that Europe is taken as and the various European countries as models of something that never existed. Not only that doesn't exist today, because of course we're not the kind of people that were often depicted in terms of our alleged national identity or legacy, etc., because it's also in the mind of who thinks these things, right? And even if we were, by a certain degree, the point is that being born and raised in Europe today, even from, let's say, a native kind of European background, like properly from traditionally ethnic Europeans in a traditional context, in a local reality, so the hardcore rooted European thing, like it can be as well. The question is, this hasn't anything to do anymore with the actual knowledge or understanding or awareness of literally anything of that background. You would be surprised of that. This is not just kind of, the left is just a consequence of this. It's not the cause of that. Of course, it's also a cause by a certain degree, but let's say it could happen historically just because of the dimming of awareness about ourselves historically, which arguably, like, on average, people never were. That's why I countered the fourth estate, because I believe that this came to happen where people that had never known who they were, so very far from the bullshit that Europeans had this strong intrinsic tradition. No, it was the elites. It was the elites that created that, and they had the power and the intelligence and the capacity, right? Then they also softened up. And the people rose, but also softened up. But there already were wars. And so we have arrived at the point that it's not that if you're born in Europe, you have the palest idea of any form of European history, culture, or tradition. Like, it's not that you're born in one country, you know what other countries are. Like, this happens to me constantly. Like, zero. Right? Even bordering countries or countries that, this is not, if you don't know the history of San Marino, for example. This is about not knowing the history of even just if it were every European country, even San Marino is important. But let's say this is about not having literally the palest idea of the major civilizational accomplishments of which the entire European history in the last millennia has been, even by having ever heard of them. And there is a radically insular mentality, especially allegedly by actually the countries that should be allegedly the most advanced, right? Where this thing has completely disappeared. This is terrifying, right? And knowing history, of course, makes you aware of that. But this is the point entirely. We haven't known it anymore. So nobody really understands here what... And I say this because the worst countries in Europe are the ones that are allegedly more traditionalistic or seen as such. That's absolutely bullshit. First of all, most of them fell in the post-socialist world, which absolutely was already before the rise of communism, the era of Europe that had the least development, and not for any good reason, telling the truth, because very often we confuse primitivism, again, the collectivistic, statalistic ethno-nationalist will see, being, an underdeveloped country, like, I don't know, we were more traditional. No, you were just underdeveloped as shit. That's the problem, right? And there is nothing about that, European culture was pioneered by the single most advanced civilizations in a radically universal and traditional way, right? And most of which actually civilized your own countries, first of all. Secondly, abroad too, being, again, today a conservative, as just being a liberal, is actually something you should feel ashamed for, and especially, your parental upbringing and whatever your cultural background is, because if average conservatism is what it is, again, there is... it's an illness. It's a disease. it has nothing to do with European tradition, of which you don't know anything. Because I just can ask you, as again, somebody who makes exams to adult people, like a question you could make to a 6 years old about history, you not knowing it as a freaking adult, right? So let's stop pretending that there is anything European about yourself, or that you are a Westerner, that is an actual identity, because it's false, right? You are not. You don't know anything about that, hence you don't belong here. Nobody cares that your ancestors are from here or whatever, right? That has nothing to do with it, right? European tradition has nothing to do with that as well. Indo-Europeans mostly came from a fringe area of Europe, not even the countries that we're habituated to think they are, right? So even just, it's not a matter of genes, it's a matter of your brain, right? And that's sadly always the same old story. But I don't even remember how I got here, but that's exactly the point. Don't flatter yourself if you are unworthy, because it's the worst thing you can do. Before, I'd say disadvantaged people were appreciated because they were literally kind of nice, right? They were so unspoiled. I had the opportunity of even meeting some realists that were really kind and courteous, and they cared. They may be narrow-minded and limited and whatever, but they weren't evilly stupid, right? There was, of course, a dimension that could take over to a certain degree, but especially since the nationalistic, statalistic revolution of the 18th, 19th century, this thing has radically degenerated, right? Also, the peasantry masses at that point had understood perfectly the balance, even though maybe they didn't like it, but they understood the nature of the balance and of the stability. Were polluted with this sense of entitlement that, again, brought them to reverse themselves eventually in the cities. And so we are all product of that by a certain degree. But again, have erased just by sheer mass that kind of European traditional identity, which doesn't exist anymore. So, again, the point of this digression is considering that you cannot claim to be something that you're not if you don't demonstrate it with actual evidence. And this evidence, in fact, most of the times is only made up. And it melts away just as soon as you meet somebody who's not as stupid as you. That's the point. So going back to the method there, the best thing you can do is realizing that if the top scholarly effort gets down just to chit-chatting about, for example, the history of warfare and pretending that this is, so irrelevant, or, maybe just mysteriously approachable because you, even as a specialist, haven't taken the time of going that far by self-sacrificing yourself and just cared about the career and the publications and whatever, and you just hint at something rather than actually explaining it, you are making a disservice to your civilization. Because your civilization has gone far beyond this, right? von Clausewitz was a hell of a military historian, by the way, would have never approached discursively and without a tactical analysis a battle. I would make a video on explaining how also this came to be, because of course Marxism has to do with that, and so even the post-World War II issues have influenced a lot. Again, this has nothing to do by saying, no, history is being rewritten. No, it's bullshit. History, first of all, has not been written yet. And secondly, what we know, however, is very accurate in the larger picture. Like, no, you will never, live in our reality, even though you crave for it, but you're too ignorant to realize why it can't be done, because it has major implications where, you think you can rehabilitate the Nazis. It will not happen, right? It's much more terrible to pretend that, there was something glorious about the Soviet Union, or that they actually won the war, because, frankly, after 20 million dead and Stalinian terror and other 50 years of of utter misery. Even, Germans, Italians, and Japanese that actually did pretty well seemed more like winners of World War II in comparison. And so the question, and then you still have problems today in the way we witness, for which others still have to pay for your defeat fundamentally. But aside from this, and this is to say that the Nazis lost, but the Axis kind of lost, but it lost badly, right? And it lost badly because they were all bad, right? Let's also understand about this that relative and absolute are first of all two different things, and I think that being a Westerner is first and foremost being able to differentiate, because if you don't, you're paranoid, and that's the first hallmark of non-Westerners. But which instead some countries, especially the ones ravaged by communism, have taken as their entire national identity, paranoia. But let's say, even at the time, things like National Socialism, fascism, were, in fact, statalist collectivisms, right? And they were pretty bad. The fact that the Nazis managed to catch off guard countries like France, Britain, etc., has nothing to do with, speaking of quality level of their achievements. There was not a magnificent civilization of super Aryanism, of strength, of purity and bravery. It was just a bunch of charlatans, of radically diseased, both morally and materially, people who just, again, because of their bloody, satanic ideology, managed to kill others in that bloody fort, and still lost miserably out of their sheer incompetence. I mean, the Nazis underestimated by far even just the number of Soviet divisions where it's not a Soviet merit. Right? The Soviet Union suffered something that comparatively not even Germany did. It was devastating in human terms. There is nothing to be proud of, right? Even considering after that, of course, in fact, it was just a terrible totalitarianism. There were contending powers among each other. There's no patriotic war, there's no victory, there's just an enormous amount of human abomination, right? Every single person should wake up every morning and feeling ashamed for the same fact that the Soviet existed, right? That there was somebody who gave power to people that were not even just maniacs, they were overly incompetent, right? This is and you don't know where it's worse. You see, the Nazis were nuts, but at least they knew how to do certain things. The Soviet Union didn't know how to do anything. They just threw people to plain butchery because of course Marxism doesn't give any value to humanity in any traceable form. But we're talking about this effectively, and we're talking about, of course, the Western allies that were also, actually underperforming. I mean, the British performed well against the Italians just because the Italians were dramatically worse than them, but the British sucked. The French, we'll see what happened. The Americans as well actually just went in with massive industrial force and capacity, but also from a strictly strategical point of view, this is unfortunately being proven, but later on during Vietnam and beyond, they were kind of bad, telling you the truth. So there was again, even the Nazis found would work doctrinally, and they were initially for that doctrine kind of better than all the others. This is true, but still they lost badly out of their sheer and radical incompetence and incapacity and utter political illiteracy. Like, there is not anything to be proud of in any of that background. So when you think about Europeanness and you're just wired on this kind of nationalistic, socialistic delusions, because that's the only horizon that, for example, Generation Z has at this point. They get to know history through TV series and video games. They don't know that there are history books, also because their parents have never opened them, and that's the actual point. You find the need of reimposing an actual discipline, but I mean, the one that could be a 19th century one was still the idea of duty, for example, in the Ancien regime was really powerful, right? And had not been, even in some of the most newly created, even statistical research, where it was very intense. It's absolutely incomparable with anything we have today, right? Also in learning, also in education. Of course, it's completely useless to go to school today. But I don't mean it, again, because the institution should be torn down. It's because there are communists teaching to children. That's just a sad reality. But the problem is everybody's. Right? If you have a major problem with the left, it's because also the right let it happen. It's your cultural background of which you should be ashamed, because you're responsible anyhow. Right? So let's not talk anymore as if, these were the dichotomies that we have to care about, and we let actual culture die out. Because the reason why these professors don't write books anymore that really tell anything meaningful, even about warfare, right? You don't know why it happens, right? The impression to me, you know what it is that there are going to be ever fewer of them, that most people that before studied history to make a living don't go for there anymore because they think they don't make enough money for that. So I think that the actual heroes are the privileged people who studied just for the sake of it and just to be a pain in the behind for all those who want to trick others, and still maintaining those moral scientific standards to show, look, this is how, true things were done once upon a time, was just, 2 generations ago, were still worked qualitatively, at least by our own time's degree. And being an example for the others, and being harsh as well in the process. Because by being superficial, a professor can simply write 20 articles instead than one, and pretending that he has been studying his entire life deeply about the problem. Well, while I can do it without even coming from, a family of professors or people of, particularly intellectual development, that were kind of upper middle class in that sense, but nothing, again, special in that regard as well. And that could simply, motivate himself to the point of simply talking about this stuff and, again, hopefully making a difference with his own publications now. And as you know, I had a stop in the last year, so now I'm coming back, and so I will publish stuff. I will publish this thing now because it's going to be also immediately available, but I still will not tell you who I am, because I don't, that's not the point. But surely I will update you about the consequences of this publishing. In January I will also finish writing something, but it will be published probably later during the rest of the year, or even the one after, I don't know. But I will keep writing, and I have, as I was saying, also yet another article that I had started writing last year, but then I bailed out because I was collapsing mentally. And Schwerpunkt kept me alive in a sense. But the only way to become an expert, as I explained to you, is making the work. Right? Don't flatter yourself with telling how I also do, how many books I have, or whatever, but by actually reading them. And being aware of the complexity of the world. Reading is just the first step, right? If you can't afford being an expert proper because you know that you're never going to the top because you're making another job and you're not doing anything special, the question is, but how far do you want? How much worth do you give to yourself? Because there is also a critical moment in life when you have to decide who you want to be, which is not much, unfortunately, at the beginning, where you can still know most of it, but at a point when you start realizing concretely these kind of dimensions. I know that most people struggle with money. I don't want to sound disrespectful when I say, these fourth estaters are a bunch of animals and all these kind of things. I don't really think that it's a matter of being poor or not. I think that even the elite, as I was saying, is stupid. I'm just saying that on average, the elite is stupid, but the rest of people are worse. And the reason, what I want to make you understand, is there are civilizational tools, right, properly institutions that have a meaning that goes beyond even our historical times. Like, we should be proud of what we have built, right? Even when it doesn't work well, even when it's infested with communists, you can fix that. You don't have to tear it down. You don't have to turn your back to say things like public education just because, okay, there are, in most countries in the world, they presume that public education is worse than private one, but let's say the advantages civilizationally that you can achieve through public education are, like, in every great country, in every great civilization, there was such thing like that, right? And of course, by a degree, everything is private in the sense that even the public is, as the same Marxists show, it can be infiltrated. But this is exactly the point. If you are bringing in a positive value and you know that it's stronger and that it will win, why do you shy away? That sounds like cowardice. It's vile. It's paranoid. It's saying, it's like those people who say, I don't know, I hear often among, I don't know, the Hemaists, the reenactors, the academics. No, they don't understand. Why? Academics don't understand it. You do. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, do you realize what your standards are, and how can you speak bad over the academy? The fact that the academy is spoiled doesn't mean that you're anything better, by far, in this case. Right? So that's the same story. I don't flatter my own category, but I give an objective judgment about the level to which it sucks and compare it to other levels of why they sucks. That's what it means to be a historian. You can see that the glass is half full or half empty. I see it probably half empty because, you know why? Because I have high standards and expectations. So I always fall short of the same. And that's what motivates me. Because I know the power that it entails. Because when I write those freaking articles, and I realize that nobody even made, there are, I don't know, 7 articles about a battle. None of them actually even took in consideration the tactical reconstruction of the same. And the only one, when it happens, making countless mistakes in the way, not taking in consideration the whole picture, is I know that they didn't work enough. And that had they done that, I would have surely skyrocketed in that sense, in their stead. And that's why I'm trying to do the same now, right? Which actually confers me even more power, because it's as if to say, like, of all the historiography, I can't simply, be the best one, even though I'm not even sure that I'm better than those historians, even professional, but about this specific topic, which I'm becoming a professional, or already am. So it's like with Schwerpunkt's video. I know that at the beginning people say, what the hell this is, it's boring, whatever. But if you look at it and people subscribe, it's because I am doing stuff that objectively is needed, that you wouldn't find elsewhere. You can find, again, it's like the other videos on YouTube about medieval warfare, the art of war. What do they actually do or say? Like, the top, most famous figures on YouTube about warfare, and I'm talking about similar people like me, first of all, are all Emaists / reenactors, right? I will not make their names because you all know them by a certain degree. If you visit their channels, they actually don't talk about the art of war. They just don't. They stop to think, like, look at this weapon, how it's shaped. And then they haven't even made a video about a battle reconstructed from the actual sources. I made several last hours, and it didn't really take much, because I actually studied the thing, and it's relatively simple to do, or at least, in a YouTube format, you can come to say very interesting things, and you will not find anything there. These are people that also, maybe a new TV series comes out, it's supposed to be historical, and it's just a load of garbage, and they make you pass it for historical reliable, especially from a historical point of view, just because, I don't know, the people in it actually wear historical costumes, and that represent a total bullshit about everything, politically, militarily, socially, whatever, but, they're dressed well. then you wonder why you have bias against reenactors, etc. Because that's the actual mirroring of that failure, that incompetence. Like you don't see the bigger picture, and that's, as always, the main problem. And again, it always sounds as if I were speaking greatly of me. I don't. These are just standards that I also, again, run short of myself when I look at, at the academy, because I have to toughen up myself, and I will keep doing that. But hell, like, these people don't even try, and that's what triggers me, and that's why I think I am maybe also pouring out all this negative force, apparently. But again, if there is no sufferance in that level, how can you have a successful reaction? How can you, how can you bring, in fact, anything new on the table and actually making the work done? That's, to me, the most important thing. I don't see it really as a problem. In fact, speaking of paranoia, very often on those channels, not only they don't talk about the art of war, or if they were asked just to define things like strategy and tactics in a Clausewitzian way, they wouldn't know how to do that, because they're not habituated even, let alone carrying out an actual tactical or even more strategical analysis. Hell, I found even professor who said, I don't understand tactics, strategy is simpler to me. Yeah, how credible you are, right? Basically, first of all, the other way around, the diametric opposite is true, because strategy is magnitudinally more complex than tactics, but by far, and it's a total mess. Then you're just admitting that you're stupid, because even if you were dominating strategy, which takes a lot of intelligence, if you don't understand tactics, there is something wrong with your brain, and the more likely thing is that you don't understand neither of them, right? Nor tactics, nor strategy, absolutely even better than tactics, given that it's a much more complex thing. It's like those, I don't know, I found the worst, guys. I found really the worst. I found Himais instructors, those are the worst. Like, let me tell you, as a category, I have a huge bias against them for many reasons, but it's what I experienced personally. Right, they're kids, like, they want to show off. They're exhibitionists, fundamentally. At everything they're concerned, they think to be new knights or whatever. They don't know anything, of course, about Middle Ages by any stretch of the imagination. They're the same people, like 16 years old on blogs say, war is about logistics, man. Yeah, the strategy is all about logistics. Yeah, not even knowing that logistics is not a branch of the art of war, and that, what they mean by logistics is just thinking there's a train of stuff that arrives to the front, and they don't even know where to locate their forces, even just to have them effectively supplied. That's actually strategy. But there is a cult around them, and it's sort of, again, superstitious cult. People gather because they don't find anything better than these clowns, and we are still thinking that it's going to make a difference. And I know that I have Imaists and I have reenactors among my audience, and some of them are very sensible people, telling the truth, because, I'm talking about what I've met, the average, but I know that there are, and I want to hope that this is maybe because of what I say that attracts them. So it's not that I have anything, again, I just talk shit about my own category. So I can't say literally whatever I want about anybody else, as long as I provide with the evidence for it. I could give you the names of these people, but they would shut my channel down because it would be kind of harassment. They would sue me or whatever. I'm not talking about the channel owners. I'm talking about the single people that I met, especially in my Hima. But that would be kind of a harassment. But they know, right? If they ever listen to this, they would know that it's them. Right, and I'm glad, of course, they never will, because, of course, my content is too difficult for their brain to digest. But, again, we can't even complain that this is the case of the story if the academics do not make this work specifically. But it's fundamental in any branch of the art of war, and when you carry out an analysis, to actually explain what happened. Like, this may seem strange, but most of history has become descriptive and analytic. People take a bunch of stuff, they specialize in making a sort of strange, living room chit chat about that, and basically not, especially what strikes me is not adding anything to what has been written historiographically on. There are lots of articles types, for example, that go around this pattern. Let's make a point of this historiographical situation. They literally say, this author said that, this author said this, who knows how it will go. Like, what did you add? Like, unless, normally I quote, of course, will have to quote also, generally speaking, showing that they are incompetent in a way if they made mistakes, but still that maybe there is a part of their work that I'm using and because it's good instead, and then adding something new on that base. We are arrived to the point we don't do that even anymore, or we pretend that a certain type of method, for example, doesn't work. As you know, for those who follow me for a long time, I'm, for example, a strong advocate on the reliability of chronicles, because without that, and this is being recognized, at least, in my country, in continental Europe, the Anglosphere has a bit more of bias, and again, it's a political, cultural problem. It's not even a historical opinion. And there are, you see, you become an expert when you start realizing the reasons that are behind these biases, even your own, because that's fundamentally what you're supposed to do eventually by growing up as a human being, as a mature person. And the reason why chronicles are still snobbed in a way is because nobody reconstruct battles. If they had to reconstruct battles, those are the only sources that you find. There are no others, right? Of course, you should know what kind of troops there were. You can look at equipment, armament, archive sources, whatever, but you will not find it on an archive unless it's a letter, and it's like over what chronicles normally offers, like 100 of the entire bibliography that you have to read, letters about the battle, that you can't reconstruct a freaking battle. Because guess what? You have to study combat if you want to understand warfare. Because if you don't study that, basically you don't studying a car, not studying how it performs while driving. Like, what's the point of it all? It's just circling around without doing anything. We have arrived to this point historiographically. We have arrived to the point that you cannot even rely on historians. You cannot rely on the first person that uploads a paper on academia.edu, because the same call for papers have become like a farce. It's all to make universities earning money for these conferences, because they can't pay, you will pay them essentially to see your stuff published, and then you will have your stupid curriculum of garbage on a list that the ignorant thinks that has any value, and then nobody will read your stuff until you will maybe be hired somewhere, but people will realize you suck. Because I can tell you, by the way, that at university, professors who suck are recognized as such. There is, first of all, a great rivalry between the scholars in the first place. It always happened, but let's say in general, you can immediately understand a professor that doesn't know shit since the first years of university, because they don't really do it, right? At the beginning, of course, you're stupid and ignorant yourself, so you pretend you know better, but sometimes it truly is the case. If you're really driven, and maybe they have a more comprehensive view of the world, it's normal for them not to know any detail, but sometimes they're saying something extremely stupid themselves about literally manualistic stuff. You would think, again, that a medieval professor, you open a medieval history manual and you point at something, whatever the topic is, and this person is obviously capable of even just describing what it is. No, they won't. They will not do that. I met them countless times. Even people that I esteem, actually, that know a lot of things, are very great experts and intelligent people in their own field, but sometimes they don't know anything about even just the rest of the Middle Ages, but maybe just even something that is very close in time and space to their own topic as well, right? I've seen the worst, right? And that's one of the main reasons also why military history offers the possibility to improve yourself, is exactly the diachronic capacity. But relatively to the comparative one that we also were hinting at before, you understand from this whole speech, of course, is that if you don't compare different battles, you will never know how relevant they are to one another. And this is valid for any other thing. People, countries, opinions, beliefs. anything, everything has a value, everything has a worth, and this is not negotiable, right? The moment in which it becomes negotiable, it becomes moral relativism, and it means that you are denying reality, and so driving away from accomplishing anything positive or successful and useful. And you're creating a damage because, again, you would have the possibility of doing something positive. You don't. On the contrary, you erode. This is not doing nothing or doing something positive that is better than nothing. No, this is actually doing bad things. And believe me, it's happening all the time. So expertise is earned over an atrocious amount of time. Again, it's not about staying on Facebook groups. It's not about it comes from different life experiences of everything that you have learned before, but the actual scientific and moral standard comes from the exercise and the method that I told you. There's no other way around that, right? And it has to last years, right? Don't think that you're competent, for example, because you have a sheet of paper that says that you are a historian. Maybe it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Today, in today's world, today's market, it's nothing, right? Be aware of that you can find some jobs like a teacher, etc., that I think it's a terrible job, by the way. And not just, and the average teachers are terrible today, and I'm perfectly, meaning that, because again, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not. I don't care if people hate me. I don't give a shit about that. I'm just telling you that because children are taught by those people. So that's terrifying, right? If you want just to make money, just do something else. Don't pollute young people's minds, because it's dangerous, right? If you couldn't learn, I found some of the worst people, or literally in my life, were school teachers. Some of the worst ones. Fortunately, not much my own, but I also found many teachers in my schools who were terrifyingly ignorant or incapable, or even maybe good people. Left that aside. Some were, I can't remember really truly bad people, but some of them were just diseased. Yeah, you could understand that they didn't know themselves things. Sometimes you had to teach them. This happens to me also at university. I often, most of my exams ended up with me making questions to my professors and they not being able to answer, and me actually adding some data about things they didn't know and I wanted to know. But I found, like, even some of the grossest, like, historical, geographical ignorance, I remember some things in my life were horrendous. But these people in the system now, which is a spoiled one, it's about people who earn money for not producing any more. Like, we're complaining that, we're getting poorer. But what did we do to actually earn this? Right, there are certain mechanisms that there are virtues and that bring to cooperation, to profit, etc. Even through bad things, for example. But a certain degree, wealth must be earned. Like, people's needs are not invented on some strange base. They actually reflect reality, right? So, what kind of wealth do those people produce? Like, just staying there for children and telling them nothing sensible and just waiting, like, even more than the children themselves, the bell to ring to go away from that place, just so that at the end of the month they will have a check. That doesn't produce wealth, right? And as such workers should be removed, right? We don't earn enough. And so what do you want? Should I maintain you because you're incapable? Like, if I earn, and, yes, having money is also an important thing. Like, you can be more privileged than others. There are lots of people that are competent and capable but struggle and can't earn. But if you really dig into their lives or what they do, you realize that, yes, they are the way they are, and they choose very often to be the way they are. And very often are maybe the geniuses that really struggle, right? Because others can't see really how worth they are. This is a problem that we all have, right? From even the incompetent teacher to the greatest and most admirable, respected persons you can think of. But it's still in part their fault. Actually, it's as far as they are concerned, as far as we are concerned, everything that happens to us, even in the connection that we wouldn't contemplate that, or at least we wouldn't think we would have to cope with it or to prepare to it, is our fault, right? And you would be surprised, no, you wouldn't probably, to know that universal tradition was based on this concept. Because we all gamble with life. We know that, for example, bad things are going to happen. Illnesses, deaths, many tragedies. That this is life, right? But how prepared are we really? Really, how much do we care about being up to the standard of life? Nobody can be fully up to that standard, but at least you should try to be in the condition of being able to cope with it. And if you teach children since, in fact, their early years, that after all, everything is always going to, well, or maybe, it's not going to be, but because there are very bad people, and of course, there is no such thing like individual responsibility as well attached, and you are a saint, a victim, or a martyr, and you're discriminated and oppressed and persecuted, etc., and there's nothing that can be changed. You are essentially killing these children. You're essentially nullifying their potential as human beings, and as adults, they will be incapable of defending themselves. Like, there is the weak type. Like, even in still this kind of conservative background, we still have retained something interesting. In also liberals have it, but certainly, toughen yourself up. Right? Sometimes you go out in the street, you meet even people that are evidently weak. They're just glued on their phone. Maybe something happens, like they don't cross the street and where they have to, they're about to be ran over, and you understand from their reactions, they are completely dehabituated from having an inner resistance. They're just subject to the world. They're just oppressed by themselves. They are in a condition that is being created by themselves. Arguably, other people will say, well, this also depends on the fact that they were maybe born in difficult contexts, and so you shouldn't be so hard with them, etc. Yeah, okay, but there's no other medicine but being hard with them in order to toughen them up. Because if you just flatter people, or if you just think you can count solely on reason, or pretending that somebody's going to listen to your change or making significant change, at a point you will realize, and believe me, because this happened to me, I try to change people, right, often, because I would like them to be up to some standards as well, because I know what's their potential, because I believe in them, right? It's a beautiful thing. I wouldn't do it to somebody, maybe, I don't know, it's a male thing. They did it men are more provoking and aggressive and whatever. Maybe it's just, it just happens. It's character as well at some time. I'm not even so oppressive as an individual myself, but it's just the idea that, when you really like someone, you want someone to, show me what you really are. Like, I need to, I want to test you, because I need to rely on you on the hard things that will happen if we are to be together. At a point, you realize that the time and resources that you invest doing that, at a point, are not worth anymore. It sounds terrifying, but that's also when I say that human life does have a price on the market. Right? You can attribute to the potential of it an infinite value, but to the practice of it, we have the world, and we see what's the world about. And sadly enough, people are not very worthy. What are you going to do if not toughening them up? The crisis would maybe toughen them up again, but it will take a long time. It's not necessarily going better, because most crises open to a dramatic lowering of individual standard that remained for a very long time, eventually unchanged. So that's why I am, negative about that, because we are witnessing from, I have been realizing it in the last decade, that we are on the brink of one of the major civilizational contractions, at least, right? Collapse is too much of a word. It could easily happen as well, but in general, just as all the indicators that we're putting together. I don't think, even if we live in a privileged world, those resources are kind of ending, in the sense that, civilization doesn't stand on just on what you accumulated before, right? It must keep producing, right? And so for whichever the reasons, there are absolutely not the crisis of what people call capitalism, whatever, because things go back and forth continuously. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with people's morality, moral forces. That's the only thing. Like, it can't be just a matter of how you pay them, for example. Of course, materialism doesn't find its way. This is the real point, because you see, if you even thought as a materialist, not even Marx and Weber schools kind of ever denied, of course, that ideas and matter had an influence on each other. Never. They just debated on which degree, right? Marx thought it was about primarily matter, Weber ideas. But the connection to this, because first of all, you cannot disconnect them, right? So that's what they also understood. But it's also evident that matter, while providing you with some means to do things, also doesn't work alone. This is the actual problem. If anything, it degrades. So it actually rose backwards. So the only force that is capable of making a change is the moral one. So that's why pietism doesn't lead anywhere. Because you don't help a person who is weak by just feeding their weakness and increasing it in the first place. And that's why we need to be tougher. But tougher also in an intelligent way, not in a sociopathic way, or presenting that, I don't know. Okay, again, that's where paranoia begins. This has nothing to do with that. It's the opposite direction. and paranoia is, if anything, a symptom of that weakness. What we propose here, as you know, from all this videos I make on the topic, is the exact opposite. People should toughen up morally, and the moral space is always really infinite, right? There are limits, of course, of what you can learn and how, etc., because they are connected to matter. There's no doubt about this. But at the same time, while matter cannot be created out of scratch, moral forces can. You can train yourself to think. It does cost, but the investment is dramatically more remunerative. The outcome is fantastic. And so history helps. After all, today we have all a chance to speak our mind, like publicly in a sense. So I could, like right now, I do very specific things in my life, but I could easily make a living just by talking about these things in other contexts, in other places. But there is a plan behind this all. And that's the thing that keeps me alive. Dreaming and planning and seeing things happening. It's all like, it's cool to see what's gonna happen next. Even if it's a disaster, even if it's bad, right? It's still a moment in which you can be up to something and finding a new solution. So I don't really say it's in the moment of crisis, according to universal tradition, say that the soul is toughens itself. That there's really tests that can make the difference. And you may not have this chance at other times, especially the ones in which that we have just lived were just the easy ones, right? So you would say, how does the art of war is connected with this? Well, I think you understood that from this video. It's being up to a standard. Is being honest with yourself, is sorting out what happened in a specific situation on the basis of the evidence that you have, and not on your wishful thinking, because abstraction is anti-traditional. It's all action and reality that matter. So if you don't know how to reconstruct that, or you're not habituated to think history like that, but also because there is specifically a way of making history that had properly distracted you from thinking straight. And surely, yes, materialism, the specific socioeconomical bias over the political military one has ruined great part of our way of understanding, because we began to see history again as something that flows over us, and we didn't understand that it's simply us making it, and that there is not anything of that. It's just a spell. It's an illusion. It's a mirage. Alright, so I have to find a suitable title for this video now because it's so weird. However, for today, I will conclude it here. Just hope that you enjoyed this video, in spite of my roadness. And for now, if you did, by the way, if you please, as usual, share it, or otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time.